From DIY marketers, it's Bizapalooza Chat, a show about the basics of small business and how to implement simple but often overlooked strategies that take a little time and effort but generate big results. I'm Ivana Taylor, and on today's show, we're going to show you how to plan a business from scratch. Everyone loves the idea of being an entrepreneur and running their own business, but they hate the tedium and the frustration of planning and financial reporting and tracking, all the while knowing that these elements are critical to your business success. Financial planning, forecasting, and reporting are often the stepchildren of business planning processes. Either they're relegated to bookkeepers or CPAs who can certainly do a fabulous job of reporting and keeping you legal, right? But they can't help you manage your financial success and help you make those decisions to make your business grow. On today's chat is the product manager of Bricks, Robin Booth. Bricks is a financial reporting and tracking platform specifically designed for small businesses. Robin, welcome. It's so great to have you here today.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, I am thrilled. Okay, great. So I wanted to see your face and you weren't showing up.
Ah, okay. Well,
So, you know what's really funny, Robin? I have to say that for some reason, I keep wanting to call you Robin Hood. There's Robin Booth and Robin Hood. I don't know why. It might be the British thing.
yeah,
But, you know, it kind of makes sense with this financial platform, right?
yeah, I suppose there is an element of that, yeah. I'd much rather be Robin Hood than Robin and Batman, certainly.
Oh,
The outfits
absolutely. Absolutely. So let's begin with the obvious. Being an entrepreneur, really easy. Reporting your financial data, decidedly not sexy at all, right? So can you say a little bit about that? Like how can we begin to think of financial reporting as sexy?
Well, I think there's a sort of ingrained misconception about what accountants are like. I'm not an accountant, but I've met hundreds and hundreds of them. And everyone thinks it's a gray, boring job. And real accountants aren't quite like that. It's just that every business has to manage its finances, and it's a bit of a specialist skill. But what I want to get across and what I want to help people with is making this less of a specialist skill, making finance easy to understand and making it related to real life business activities. So I think that's where it gets away from that kind of gray, boring feel, is when you stop thinking about it in terms of accountancy and jargon, and start really thinking about it in terms of your business and how your business works.
Got it. Got it. Well, I guess my question is, let's talk about this starting a business from scratch idea. How important a role is financial planning in that process?
Well, I think it's a very important role. I mean, just to give you a little story, because I think stories help illustrate things. My first job, I was in a startup. We were a small audiobook company. I don't know if you listen to audiobooks. I'm sure some of your viewers and listeners do. But our competitor was Audible, who you may have heard of. They're owned by Amazon. And we were trying to break into this market. It was really, really difficult. It was really challenging. And we had a great few months to a year of growing the business and learning everything that a small business learns. But unfortunately, eventually, that business had to shut its doors because our costs were too high. We weren't getting the revenue streams that we needed. And a lot of that could have been avoided with some good planning. Now, the person who employed me, the entrepreneur, was a classic entrepreneur, really passionate about the business, really full of enthusiasm and really, really driven. but they hadn't really put any time into thinking about the direction they were driving the business in. They were just there cracking the whip and making sure that it was still going, but not looking ahead to the future to see what that would hold for them. And in our case, it meant that the business had to shut its doors, which was a great shame. At least it means that I can be here today to talk to you about planning, though.
Well, exactly. It's funny. One of the things I was thinking is that being an entrepreneur, almost like being an athlete. So like if you want the results, you have to train for those results. You have to, do these little activities every day. So maybe you can take us through a simple financial process that will help us stay committed to the well-being of your owner, right? I think a lot of folks, they might, hey, guilty right here, right? You start your business, it's all about revenue, 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 but you're not like really thinking about investing for growth. And if you don't invest for growth, you're not going to grow. So
Sure.
talk a little bit about some of those things, a process that we should be doing every single day. Maybe you start small and you build and build and build. What might that look like?
Sure, okay. So I think having a idea of your finances is a good place to start. A lot of people talk about making a financial plan. I think making a financial plan is great, but the most important thing is actually planning. It's the process of thinking about your financials, thinking about where you're going to be in the future. And like I said right at the start, I'm not an accountant. I think about businesses first. So if I were planning my business, I would be thinking about all of the activities that my business is doing currently, and then about what I want to do in the future. So if I want to start a new project, for example, in the future, that's going to have some financial ramifications. It's going to have costs to my time. It's going to have costs in terms of equipment or maybe software licenses, something like that. And it's going to have a revenue stream that's going to be generated at some point in the future. But if you start by thinking about these activities and then just attach some numbers to them, that's a really great place to start. And then you can move forward and think about, is this revenue actually going to happen as I predict it to happen? Will it happen a few months later? Will I not see so many sales as I expect to see? I think the cardinal sin of entrepreneurs is overestimating their sales. That was certainly the case in my experiences of small business. And it's not necessarily pessimistic or negative to make a realistic sales forecast. It's what your business will run on. It's realistic.
So let's kind of do a couple things. You've made me think of a few things here. When you're talking about these business planning, maybe even considering your finances as you're planning your business, you talked about revenue and sales. What are the basic things that we should be thinking about, maybe that you just mentioned? You can, if you want, you can like repeat those. But then what are some things that you might consider that you hadn't really thought of, right? That make that impact. Maybe they're like hidden. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you said, you might be focused on selling and delivering, but then there might be some other elements of planning costs or things you may not have considered that you should maybe plan for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think it's easy to forget all of the running costs of a business, and especially the ones that you don't see. If you have any bills that aren't directly related to what you're doing day to day, then they can creep up on you. And in different countries, it works in different ways, but taxation, of course, is a concern to think about when you're planning a business, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is having some cash in the bank so that you can pay salaries or pay yourself, because that's where it can all fall down. I think that there are other things that you need to consider as well. When you're first starting out planning a business, it's all about, the immediate future, the next few months. There'll be certain questions that you're going to be asking yourself, and they're going to be the same question each month. Am I going to get 20 more sales this month? Will that be enough? to float the boat. But there are some longer term questions as well that may only come up every 6 months or every year, but they're still going to have a big financial impact. You don't want to be surprised by those when they come along. You know, if you need to replace some equipment, for example, because it's been damaged, or if it's come to the end of its life, that's going to be a cost that you might not expect. But putting down every aspect of your business in a plan means that you can keep track of everything. You know that, say, in 7 months' time, it's likely that I'm going to have this cost, which may be a problem for the business to deal with if it doesn't keep a cash reserve at that point. There's also things like loan repayments. If you take out a loan for some funding, it's easy for them to get missed out when you're just thinking about the operational side of the business. Can you make enough cash in order to pay your suppliers? But keeping those other financial commitments you have is what's going to keep the business afloat in the end.
Now, do you consider that forecasting or planning? Maybe we should talk about what's the difference between forecasting and planning. Let's start there.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think planning is the action of looking at your business and thinking about the elements that compose that business and how they work financially. You can then start going on and making some changes in the future. For example, in planning, you can start a completely new project and then work out what the ramifications of doing that project are. It might be nothing to do with your current business. It could be a way of upselling an existing product that you have, for example, that you don't do currently. Forecasting, by contrast, tends to be a bit more locked down. I mean, in Britain, we are incredibly keen on the weather forecast. You know, it's the only topic of conversation that we can always rely on because the weather's constantly changing, usually between not much rain and a lot of rain. But forecasting in terms of finance is quite easy to get bogged down in, I think. It's easy to assume that you can just take some existing performance that the business is managing to put out. For example, you might have some products that are doing well. You might have costs that you know you're going to incur each month. And if you have those in your financial plan, then it can be tempting just to forecast those forward, to extrapolate them, to say, you know, it's likely that I will get 10% more sales next month because I'm doing some marketing activities. And hey, it's what happened this month. I'm 10% up on last month. So forecasting is a bit more of an extrapolation of existing trends, I'd say, than planning. But I think you need to have an element of both in what you're doing in order to get a full picture of not only where the business is, but also where the business can head. Because you don't want the business to remain the same forever and keep running along the same train tracks. You want it to change and develop and to see what new opportunities could do for the business.
I want to dig deeper into this forecasting conversation a little bit. Maybe you can give us some tips because I do believe it's important, right? For example, you know, I am like almost like a one-person shop and I have a virtual team. When I'm forecasting, I don't necessarily do it every week. I might take a look every quarter for sure, right?
Oh, yeah.
What happened, what's gonna happen. That's just the nature of my business, of how contracts go and such. What are your tips for some like practical, easy forecasting things that small business owners can do? And what are some of the benefits they might get from doing this repeated process?
Okay, so I think that you mentioned doing a quarterly forecast. I think that's a really great sort of periodicity to do forecasting as an exercise. I think it tells you an awful lot about your business to do that repeatedly and to have a set of financial data that you can come back and have a look at. It's great for not only tracking what your business is doing, but also seeing how you could be thinking about your business differently. So I've talked a little bit about building a business plan and building a financial plan from real world business activities. That's always how I'd approach it. So if you're looking at taking on maybe some new staff, or you're looking like moving to a new premises or starting a new product or service that you're going to monetize somehow, I'd start with that rather than start thinking exactly about how much money you're going to get. I'm really in favor of what's called bottom-up forecasting, which is starting from some low-level assumptions about what you're actually going to be doing, and then building the financial consequences on top of that. In terms of actually what you get out of this, I think the most important thing that you get is a really holistic understanding of your own business, because every entrepreneur and every business owner, well, they have to be passionate about the business. They know it, it's their stock in trade, you know. But sometimes the financial side of that can be a little obscure. You know, you see your orders come in, you see the costs that you pay on a day-to-day basis, you have bills, etc. You know what that is, but getting a full picture of this can be hard to achieve. You know, a picture that includes all of the money that you put into the business, all of the assets the business owns, all of its financial obligations, all in one place. And that can be hard to do. But if you do that, then it means that you have a snapshot of where the business is, say every quarter, and you're able to reforecast where you think the business is going to be based on performance in that previous quarter, rather than just carrying on your plan as if you hadn't been paying attention to what the business was really doing. I think plans are really mutable. They change over time. And there's nothing wrong with changing your plans at all. In fact, I think it's just part of growing as a business. You react to the world around you and to the opportunities and challenges that come along. So I think that's what I'd say in answer to that.
Do you think that by simply going through the activity of looking at your finances on a regular basis, what impact do you think happens when you're always looking at your numbers? For example, I have found that when I'm looking at my sales pipeline, it seems like I actually am more successful only because I'm looking at it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it can be a bit addictive, in fact, to start looking at the sales coming in, for example, and what your pipeline is. But it's also really good practice. You need to be able to see what is coming up in the future and what you're going to need to react to. I think that's part of the real importance of financial planning, is being able to see ahead to the challenges that you could face and the opportunities that may be available to you. Now, if you're really, really busy with everything that the business is doing, then you might miss something that could be really great for the development of the business. So making sure that you have some personal bandwidth clear in order to devote your energies to things is as important as seeing that you may be going into the red in your cash flow. Okay, maybe that is more important, but that's certainly a challenge that you can see in advance by having a financial plan.
What would you say as we kind of get into this new year? What would you give if you were to do sort of a list of things for small business owners to do as they start preparing for a new year or a new quarter? What would be your tips?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think to sound a bit like a broken record, my first tip would be to get on top of your finances. If you're not already, if you don't have a plan, then it's not too late. In fact,
How
it's
do you
never.
get on top of your finances? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. I'm using a lot of these quite nebulous phrases, and I realize that. So I'm not a spreadsheet whiz, right? I have learned everything that I know about financial planning from the software that the company that I work for makes. Um, and I would want to make a list to begin with of every cost that the business has and every source of income that the business has. That is the simplest starting point, I think. And spend an afternoon on that. Just track down every cost that the business has and make a list. You'll be surprised of some of the things that you're paying for, I'm sure.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. You know what? That reminds me almost like when you talk about that, I always say if you want to know where your priorities are, check your credit card statements, right? So
Absolutely.
like literally that's kind of what I do. That's my simple way. I can't keep track. I don't know, right? I subscribe to 10,000 different things, but my monthly credit card statement is a great place to go.
Yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And on the other side, the money that you're receiving, the sources of that and the way that changes over time may surprise you as well. Um, Often, the way that we think about both income and costs can change depending on what's important to the business. If I suddenly start receiving a lot of orders from a certain country or a certain type of business, then maybe I want to start thinking about my sources of revenue in terms of location or in terms of the type of business that is buying my products or services. And once you start going down that route, you can really begin to break down the way your business looks financially in new ways and learn new things about the way that your business works.
Really terrific because I think that uh, a real defining moment for me was understanding my costs,
Mm,
right? Where was the business coming from? What was I servicing them with? What were the costs involved in delivering that service? I think those things kind of get forgotten. And
mm,
this is where when I hired a bookkeeper was really, really eye-opening because they can help you say, hey, if you're going to do this, you can't charge less than X.
yeah, yeah. And do you think you'd have been able to do that with enough time and energy without hiring a bookkeeper? Or do you think the bookkeeper skills were really invaluable there to you?
Well, Robin, and maybe this is where we can kind of chat quickly about your platform, right? Because one of the things that I am sure most folks like me, I work online,
Mm,
I'm a stick a fork in my eye when it comes to accounting things person. And where the bookkeeper really helped, I can put out invoices, I
mm,
could bring in invoices, and I can mark them in the QuickBooks.
sure,
What
yeah.
I just had no capability of doing was making sense out of those numbers and understanding like she helped me categorize invoices and costs that went against things and she helped me fix that QuickBooks so that I understood the reports a little bit, but she was invaluable. I don't know, no platform that I had seen was able to answer the question of uh, if you're going to pay someone to do something, how much should you pay?
Mm,
And if you're going to charge for a product or a service, how much should you charge? I'm all for market pricing. Clearly, people, I'm a marketing person. However, I also believe that you need to know what your costs and your margins are before you set your price.
certainly, yeah. Okay.
So I know that there are platforms out there that will do that kind of stuff. What what is out there in terms of a platform that would help? And how can it help?
Sure. So I think you're absolutely right that the bookkeeper services were invaluable in this case. Something like QuickBooks that is a bit of an accounting first tool for those of us who aren't really accountants. It is a little complex. Um, it's a skill that you have to learn how to manipulate. Um, I think that there are tools available that can help you draw out the numbers from a tool like QuickBooks, from others like Xero, SageNote. There are wonderful tools out there that can dig into your data and find out the answers to what you need to know. Um, Often, though, these tools are aimed at accountants. It's quite difficult to go in and make those changes yourself. Now, at the moment, um, a lot of the questions we've been asking today, in fact, have been about the future. And what we just talked about was looking at data from the past, essentially, seeing what orders are coming in, what's due, etc. Um, but when you're forecasting and when you're planning, you are inherently looking at the future. And that's something that is a bit easier to ask questions of, because you don't have to deal with this huge accounting system that's dealing with actual real invoices and real things. Instead, you can look at a piece of software that forecasts directly.
So is that what the Bricks platform does? What is it and how does it work?
Okay, so in brief, Bricks is a piece of forecasting software, planning software, in fact, that we built. It's a web-based browser interface, and it allows you to build a financial picture of your business. It's based on building blocks that each represent a certain financial activity. So you might have a loan or a cost or the purchase of an asset or something like that. And each of these can be added to your plan and moved around on a timeline to show exactly when they happen. We built Bricks to be a tool that anyone can use. We found that previously other incarnations of Bricks had been used by accountants, particularly here in the UK. But we who supported that tool learned what we know about finance from playing around with it and helping out accountants. And we found it really easy. I planned my own personal finances on it. It was easy to do something like planning a wedding on it. It's just the timing of certain costs and when you expect to pay them. So we
what insights did you get when you played with the platform for yourself?
Sure. So I knew nothing about finance before. I had no idea what the difference between profit and cash was or anything like that. And I learned a huge amount about financial reporting and the way that it can show different aspects of the business. Really, cash is reality. That's what it all comes down to. And it's really weird talking to some accountants because they're like, no, profit is definitely the most important thing, because that's what a lot of the KPIs and performance indicators run off. But at the end of the day, everything is cash. So I think that's the kind of almost naive approach that we take. We take a realist approach to financial forecasting, basing it in as many real world scenarios as possible. A very striking moment that happened repeatedly, in fact, was talking to an accountant on the phone who has been using this software in the past, and they were saying, well, how can I make my debtors increase in month X? And our response to that was always, what situation are you trying to model here? I don't want to know how to increase debtors in a certain period. I want to know what the real world case here is. What are you actually doing? What's happening here? And that's how we built our system to work, to answer real world questions and make this picture of the business that can be understood by anyone, and principally by the business owner.
You're so right. When you're in corporate marketing, for example, we all like to say, marketing is an investment. And I'm one of these people. It's like, if I'm writing you a check and money disappears out of my account, that's an expense.
Yeah. Sure, I can agree with that, definitely.
Because small business owners, we look at the world very, very differently. I always like to say to folks, small businesses or small business owners are almost like super consumers.
Mm,
They're kind of like consumers and then some.
yeah, because in the end, every bit of spending does matter. I mean, hopefully you're not sort of quite on a tightrope all the time of getting in enough cash to just about cover your costs. But sometimes it can feel like that, especially if something unexpected comes up or if you have a bad period of sales for whatever reason. Um, yeah, I've seen quite a lot of business plans now, and it's really strange to me how finance often gets tacked on at the end. There are all these aspirations and plans and goals, and all those are wonderful. And you cannot run a business without being aspirational, without being positive about it. But putting something, putting some stakes in the ground, I suppose, about where you think you're going to be heading, um, is an absolute necessity, because otherwise, how do you measure your success? How do you measure your ability to um, cover your costs in 6 months' time? I think these are really important questions for any business.
I guess I want to end this by asking, what is your advice to small business owners as they're doing their planning and getting ready for the next cycle?
Okay. I would advise to keep a list of all of your costs. It doesn't matter how. And if you are used to having this dealt with by an external accountant or a bookkeeper, then get that list off them and make sure that you know it yourself. I'd advise you, if you're planning for the future, which you should be in some capacity, to make more than one plan. Okay, there isn't one future that's going to happen. There are at least three. There's one where you do badly, which could happen, and you need to plan for that. There's one where you do fairly averagely, you do as you expect to do. And there's one where you do really, really well. Now, the one where you do really, really well is great, but it also means that you've got to be able to deliver that yourself. And if you can't deliver that, if you don't have the systems in place to be able to do really, really well, then you've got a plan to start putting those systems in place, either by giving yourself more time, hiring extra staff, or doing some searching around for either software or equipment that can increase the efficiency of your business.
That is my favorite tip, Robin. Oh my God. 3 financial plans.
Yeah.
Right? The worst case scenario, most likely, and then the awesome scenario. They all are really, really specific. Thank you so much for being with us today, Robin Booth from Bricks. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much.